on behalf of the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. O'Brien, Ms. Roach, Mr. Cooley, Mr. Thomas, and Mr. Party. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Again, I want to first and foremost thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. We know that this is very difficult. And as you recall, back when we were in the voir dire process, some of the things that you told me in terms of what would make a good juror, you said, you know what, we're going to be good listeners. We're going to be fair. We're going to be unbiased. And one of the qualities that really struck me is someone said, another thing that's really important is the discourse that you have with your fellow jurors. And that is important. And now is the time to really put those into action. Because this is the tough decision. And so what I want to do is, I want to start by talking a little bit about the aggravating circumstances. And let's be clear. Let's be real clear about this. There's 5 aggravating circumstances. Only 5. No more than 5. You're going to get instructions from the court. And the court is going to tell you that in those jury instructions. And so it's important when you see prior conviction, right? And you're going to see that repeated 5 times. It's only one prior conviction. Only one prior conviction that you are to consider. I know you heard others, but only one prior conviction can you consider as an aggravating circumstance. Aggravated burglary, that's something for your consideration as an aggravating circumstance. Kidnapping, that is something for your consideration as an aggravating circumstance. Rape, that is something for your consideration as an aggravating circumstance. Robbery, that is your consideration as an aggravating circumstance. That is all that's on that side of the scale. And again, let's be clear, this is not a numbers game. This is not a weighing of this many on this side, this many on this side. Because clearly, if it were a weighing game, we have way more in number in terms of mitigating factors. Now, let's talk about mitigating factors, and I'm going to come back to those aggravating circumstances. So let's talk about mitigating factors. You heard from Deborah Parton, Anthony's sister. You heard from Loretta Parton, Anthony's mother. You heard from Judy Watson, his third cousin. You heard from Dr. Stenson. And you heard from a kindergarten teacher in his elementary school that he went to for approximately 1 school year. And so, what did Deborah Parton tell you? Deborah Parton told you that there was physical abuse. She told you that there was emotional abuse. She said they had no guidance. She said that they moved around a lot. She said that there was no love. She didn't feel any love. She said that there was no school involvement. She said something that kind of pierced my soul when she said, and she's talking about her mother. She said, my mother ruined the lives of everybody she's been involved with. This is somebody's daughter saying that about their mother. The one person on the face of the earth, the one person in the world who is supposed to be protecting you, who's supposed to have your back, who has that unconditional love for you. This is a daughter who said that about her mother. But what was even more chilling, she said, you know, and I asked her about it. She said, you know, I can understand why my dad beat her. That is coming from a daughter saying, that's the level of dysfunction that was in that home. She said it was chaotic. She said that her mom had this Mr. Bohannon. And she said that their mom left them for 2 years. And who corroborated that? You heard Judy Watson say. You know, she told about living with them and remember about the window, it was cold, all she could feel was this cold air, and then the next thing she realized is that Loretta had moved out, left the home, abandoned the kids, and abandoned you children with an abusive father. Because she said, I need to get out. And she probably did. She was a young mother. She had 6 kids by the time she was 24. She probably did need to get out, but she left her kids. You heard from Loretta. She told you she was beaten really bad. She told you about an incident where she was beaten so bad with a tire iron that she had to be hospitalized. She described Mr. Bohannon as her married friend. She talked about herself leaving for 2 years, leaving her children with their father. She talked about being in and out of prison. She talked about neglecting her children, abandoning them, not going to their schools, not taking Anthony to the doctor when she should have, that he was on Ritalin. She talked about, and what she shared with you was, she first saw Anthony being beat by his father when he was 5 years old. That's a baby. Brutally beating a baby. Who does that? A baby. Do you think 5-year-old Anthony, brutally beaten to where bruises are on his body, probably doesn't even know why he's being beaten? You don't think that carries into his adulthood? You don't think that has 0 weight? You don't think that affects choices that he makes? And let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about excuses. We're talking about what went into making this man who he is. We're talking about what affects his choices. We're not saying, we never stood up here and told you he had some disease or some mental illness and he didn't know what he was doing. We never told you that. What Dr. Stenson said to you is, there are things that happen to a person as a child that affect them forever, and it forever affects the choices that they make. And that is true for each and every one of us. Because you know what? If what happens to you as a child is 0 and means nothing, why do we educate our kids? Why do we discipline our kids? Why do we try to give them the best experiences that they can possibly have? We do that so they can make good choices as adults. Loretta didn't do that. She abandoned her kids. She abandoned Anthony. Anthony didn't have any routines or any structure. She talked about him being brutally beaten when he was 6. He told you about even more beatings. She talked about shooting at him as a means of discipline. Getting a gun and shooting it at him as a means of discipline. As if it's not enough that you're being beaten by your father. And then I asked her, what was Anthony's favorite color? She didn't know. I asked her, what did he like? I think she said he liked boxing. But she didn't know anything about her son, because she had never invested any time or attention or love into him. And you'll have an exhibit where she writes a letter years ago acknowledging that, acknowledging her shortcomings. The only thing she was telling you here was, well, I didn't do homework, I didn't go to the school with. But it was way more than that. It was abandonment. If you're abandoning your children with an abusive father. And you heard Deborah. And they don't feel love from their mother. They don't feel protection from their mother. That affects choices that they make. Yeah, they make the choice, but that affects that choice. It's like, for instance, let's say you go into a store, right? You go into a store, you clothes shop or shoe shop. And you say, well, I'm choosing the shoes I want. Well, no, you're choosing the shoes that they gave you to choose from. And that's what this situation is. Anthony is making choices based on a very cracked foundation, and that's what Dr. Stinson told you. Loretta told you she never attended any of his court hearings when he was a juvenile. And again, you heard about these other cases that he had when he was a juvenile. You're going to hear and know, yes, he had problems. You would expect somebody who has no foundation, no love, no support, no guidance, nothing. That's what you expect. And when you hear something like, well, you know, other kids come from that and they do this and they do that, this is about Anthony. This is about Anthony. Something can happen to you and something can happen to me, and our reaction is going to be different because we are two different people. So the person who survives having 9 of these, 7 of these, those are the miracles. Those are the exceptions. Those are not the rules. And that is not the standard to measure Anthony by. And then you heard Dr. Stinson, and he was on for quite a bit of time. I know you heard him give you a lot of information. But he told you physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Remember I asked Loretta about her oldest daughter, who had reported that Eric had sexually abused her. She said, I didn't believe her. I did not believe her and didn't do anything about it. Well, she wasn't taking her kids to the doctor. She wasn't going to the school. She wasn't doing any of that, so certainly she wasn't going to believe that. And this is a man who she saw brutally beating her children and herself. And so we have physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. Now, we had emotional neglect because they told you they didn't feel no love for her. None at all. Mental illness? Yeah. Incarcerated relatives? Yeah. Remember what Debbie told you, Debbie Pardon? The entire family. I think the question I asked her is, where were you when your mom was in prison the second time? She said, I was in there with her. In fact, the entire family was incarcerated at the same time. Does this sound like these other kids are surviving and thriving? No, they're out here wreaking havoc in society too, just a different kind of wreckage. So they're not him. But it's not like they're out here being shiny examples and role models. They're messed up too. They're drug addicts. They're alcoholics. Mother treated violently. Judy told you. She said she didn't see the kids getting beat, but she certainly saw Loretta being beat. Kids saw mom being beat on a regular basis. Divorce, yes. Substance abuse, yes. There was no doubling up. All of these boxes are checked, except for they had food in the house, they had clothes. And sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes that's the hardest kind of abuse for somebody to endure when you can't see it. You can see, it's like the best example, if someone does something to you physically, right? A scar can heal. A physical scar can heal. Emotional scars, lifetime. That's a lifetime. That's a lifetime. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, you heard from kindergarten teacher, I think she was, And she was the most compelling because, as she told you, she reached out to us because she saw it in the media, and she said, hey, I need to let you know this. This guy has some redeeming value because I knew him as a little boy. I knew that little boy who, even while being beaten brutally by his father, had something in him that if you put him in a program, if you gave him some attention, if you showed him just a little bit of love and concern, that he could do well. And she said he progressed. And then, what did she tell you happened? Children's Services came along. And this is how we know Children's Services was involved. Children's Services came along and said, hey, we're pulling him out of the school, we're putting him back with his mom. She told you, and you heard the same thing in records from 1980, and those other records and other records that said, then the handwriting is on the wall. And even in the letter his mother wrote, where she acknowledges, I failed him, the system failed him, his family failed him. And she says, I never showed him any love. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have jury instructions. And those jury instructions are going to tell you, and this is important, once you have deliberated and you take a vote, if that vote is not unanimous, you move on to one of the other penalties. Once you've deliberated and you take a vote, and that vote is not unanimous for debit, you move on from there to one of the other penalties. That's going to be in those jury instructions. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that the choices in Anthony Parker's life that he's made, those choices started being made for him back on November 29, 1964, when he was born. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon.